Selena Thompson, and I walked through an investigation with CPS. I was able to keep my daughter and get through that, and we have a thriving family now, a blended family. I've been married for 13 years, and we have 3 kids together.
Awesome. I'm Dominique, and I placed my son for adoption when I was 21, 25 now, and I am a single mom to a 7-year-old, and left the hospital in a closed adoption, and thankfully, through the Lord's grace and just his adoptive family sharing the gospel with me, we were able to open up our adoption, and we're walking in that.
My parents were married when I was born. There were 3 of us, and they got divorced when I was 12. So my teenage years, I lived just with my dad. He was an alcoholic for those years, and so I was kind of alone. And I got pregnant when I was 17. My daughter was born when I was 18.
Yeah. So I come from a super big family. My dad had 5 kids, and my mom had 2, and then together they had 3. And so my parents split when I was really young. I have not known them to be together. My dad passed away when I was in 7th grade, and I was raised by my stepfather and my mom, who are both alcoholics. And so just really navigated life with my 2 full siblings, and took a parenting role over them.
So I was raised in the church until my parents divorced, and so we were at church 3 times a week, probably, or more. And after the divorce, I don't think we ever went again. And so seeing the way my father acted after the divorce led me away from the Lord. It kind of shook my faith in my earthly father, so it shook my faith in my heavenly Father. And I walked away from my faith for a long time.
I did not know the Lord. I would say that I did. If you asked me 1 out of 10 if I was going to heaven, I would say that I, maybe like a 5 or 6, I didn't know or understand the gospel, but at a young age was sent to a Catholic church. A bus would come pick us up in the inner city in Massachusetts, and they would take all the inner city kids to a huge Catholic church in a neighborhood that we were very unfamiliar with, and so knew that Jesus existed and God was real and that Jesus died on the cross, but that was the level of faith that I had.
What led to me having to go through an investigation with CPS was after my daughter was born, I got heavily involved in drugs. It started out small. I was at parties and things like that, and it just got out of control. And so it became a daily use and a dependence on crystal meth. And so when people noticed that, CPS got involved.
What led to me placing my child for adoption was I was a college student. I was partying, would go attend our young adults ministry at Watermark, and met a young woman who was volunteering there, and she ended up sharing the gospel with me in a moment where I found out that I was facing my second unplanned pregnancy, and I was extremely abortion-minded at that point, was pretty confident that's what I was going to do. I went to an abortion clinic. That's where I had my pregnancy test because I couldn't afford one at the time. And they were giving free pregnancy tests. And so had an appointment, and she shared the gospel with me. And so I was able to make an adoption plan and meet a family that was wanting to adopt. So the process in making an adoption plan for me looked a lot different for a lot of women who just enter into an agency and say, hey, I'm facing an unplanned pregnancy. For me, that looked like getting connected with somebody who knew the young adult woman that was ministering to me at the time, and she knew a family who potentially wanted to adopt. And so I ended up sitting down with them at a Cane's, which is my favorite chicken place, and we ate, and I fell in love with them. And so from there, they chose an agency, and we walked through placing my child for adoption that way. prior to that, I did contact an adoption agency before I was able to meet them and know that my son's now adoptive family existed. And they sent me profile books, about 30 or 40, and I would flip through them, and they were like 2-page pamphlets of what families looked like and what their favorite Disney character was. And I found a couple, but they ended up matching the day before I called. And so I was waiting on more profile books when I was able to get connected with my son's adoptive family. So what I thought about adoption prior to placing my son for adoption was that I had zero education. So I thought that it was foster care and that the only adoption that existed was that the state would come in and take your child and you'd never see them again, which is also a skewed view of the foster care system. And so that is what I knew of it at the time. And so that getting introduced to me was really scary because it felt like I was going to be a bad parent or I wasn't able to provide. And it felt like I didn't want to do that.
The process of a CPS investigation for me was they got notified that maybe I was not a fit mother, and so they started to do home visits. They would come out and check on me and my daughter at the time that was 1.5. They would check her for any abuse that might be happening. They would look around the house to see if there was food, if she was clean, which she always was. There was no abuse. And so those appointments, happened often, and I had to go in for drug tests and things like that, which I passed every one of them. I don't know how. And then I moved from California, where this was happening, to Texas to live with my mom. I figured I needed to get out of that world. I needed to get away from the boyfriend I was with. And so when I moved to Texas, I thought that would end and I would get my life straight. Unfortunately, CPS follows you state to state. So the investigation continued. They would come to my mom's house, and they ended up placing my daughter in my mother's care. So technically, she was placed into foster care with my mother, but we lived in the same house. And so for me, luckily, I felt like I never really lost my daughter, but there was about a little less than a year that she was technically not in my care. She was in my mother's care. Prior to my investigation starting with CPS, I had friends who had kids taken away. And so my impression was once CPS gets involved, they take your kids and you never see them again, like you said. And so I was very scared, which is why I left California and came to Texas to try to get away from that. I was afraid that if they took her, I would never see her again. During the investigation, I perceived myself as a terrible mother. The things that they would ask, the questions they had for me, the way that they would look at my daughter and look at me, I felt inadequate to even be a mother. I didn't know whether I could do it or not. I didn't know if I could parent her the way she needed to be parented, but I knew that I wanted to. But I felt very inadequate.
Yeah. My identity as a mom was the same. I felt inadequate, and I separated myself from the pregnancy because that felt easier. If I was not his mom or his mother or his parent, then it felt easier to just disconnect myself emotionally from him, and that felt like what was right at the time. And so throughout pregnancy, I wasn't really upset or sad. I really just kept saying, I just want to be done with this. I don't think that I ever want to have contact up until that point. And again, that is because of lack of education. Nobody at the time was pushing back or asking me the hard questions. And so because there's not a lot of expectant parent education, it was really hard at the time to navigate those emotions. And so my coping mechanism for that looked like disconnecting myself and placing Allie, my son's adoptive mom, into his mother role as soon as possible.
being compared a biological mother to maybe my mom or another foster parent is hard. It's real hard. I feel like I was looked down upon, and even now when I tell this story, I feel like sometimes I'm still looked down upon. And I feel like people don't understand maybe where a biological mother is coming from and the struggles that she's going through. And so I feel like, you know, my mom had her own issues. She was just able to parent my daughter in a time where I couldn't. And I don't think that society really sees it that way.
Yeah.
A lot of times.
Yeah, I agree. I think that in comparing myself to adoptive families, you're sitting there and you get profile book after profile book of here's this perfect house and this perfectly green grass and these perfect careers, these perfect degrees, and here's all of our favorite perfect things. And then here's my case file of here's every really bad thing about me, including the drug test that I didn't just pass while I'm pregnant, and how did I get pregnant, and how did I end up here, and what's my family history. And it's invasive, it feels like, because you think, wow, I'm such a terrible person, which really affects your decision to place your child for adoption, because how can you say I'm the best for this child, and then at the same time it's like perfection is what it looks like, is what's being presented to you, and there's not that inauthentic exchange prior to me meeting my son's adoptive family that is just like, here's everything really great about us. And so when I did meet my son's adoptive family, the first thing that they did was sit down and say, hey, these are our testimonies. This is where we've been. This is where we've come from. And my son's adoptive mom had been in a similar situation as I did, and chose a different path. And so it was just cool to sit and feel like I could breathe with other people that were on a different path of life than I was, but that I was able to relate to. Like, we're all one step away from being pregnant, falling into temptation, not being able to provide for our children. And like you said, that people may not understand, especially that at one point in time we were children that needed to be cared for a lot of the time, and that nobody stepped up in those moments to help our parents model that well for them. And so it's just these cycles that eventually somebody has to break, but it takes a village for people to step in and say, we're going to care for not only this child, but for the birth family, which is so important. What helped me heal after placing my child for adoption was community, knowing that other women were experiencing the same thing at me in the same season at the same time, that my story wasn't new information, and that Satan wasn't creative in even the details of my story and how I got pregnant and where I was. And I think what helped, how did the church get involved from there, was a huge part of that, by creating a space where I could come and be fully known and without judgment. And that the church really got involved in my story and really stepped in, I think almost, I would say, like as this leadership or parenting role that I'd never had. And it was just a bunch of community of believers without a ministry at the time. They was just like, sure, I'll take in the crazy girl, And so I lived with a couple for a week. They didn't even know me. I lived for a year for free in somebody's back house. And it's not the need to provide financially always for bio families, because that isn't always the best case scenario. But I think for me, people who are just willing to say like, hey, this after placement, we love and care about him, but he is well taken care of. And so what about you? What about your other son? And what are y'all's needs? And how can we meet them? And because, I would say at least like 20 people just stepped up that had no idea who I was, where I came from, and just were willing to say yes.
See, for me, it was a little different. So for me, what helped me heal was my family. So my mom caring for my daughter, my sister, who's 4 years younger than me, was in high school at the time, and she became my daughter's best friend, really. And my daughter really looks up to her aunt, you know? And so the church, I actually didn't find my way back to the church until my husband and I started to go through a rough patch. So we came to Watermark for that. And again, that's where I found out that my story is not unique and that other people have gone through the same things that I've gone through. And that helped me overcome the feelings I still had. My daughter was 13 when we came to Watermark, and I still had feelings of being a bad parent or not being able to parent her correctly, or missing out on those years that I was on drugs. And so the church just was a place, a safe place where God could show me that He is in control and that my story it is, one, not unique, and two, is going to help other people so that they know bio families are not the enemy. Bio moms are not always the enemy or the bad person. They're just going through a struggle in life that, I'm going to cry. They're just going through a struggle in life at the time, and they need help too.
Yeah.
So my impressions of the church just stemmed from my childhood. We left the church when my parents got divorced, and I grew up in a church where that was common. You didn't get divorced, and so we obviously couldn't go back to church. And so it wasn't a place I could walk in with my brokenness. It was, in my mind, it was not a place I could bring my junk. I could bring my hard stuff. You had to be good, you had to be pretty, you had to be on the right path in order to even go to church.
Yeah, I would say the same for me. It was at first, I think I was just showing up to church at our young adult ministry on Tuesday nights, and was just showing up in my cute outfit and hopefully trying to find godly Christian guy, and I had no idea the depth of the gospel at that time. And so I thought that you showed up, and you can walk into our church and at Watermark, and you can be overwhelmed by just the building itself and just the people that you see walking around. But I mean, you sit with people and they are ready to be like, this is my junk, you can have it, like, want to hear about it. And it's super cool when you start digging in, I think. And I think making the church feel smaller by just getting to know people and being authentic with your story and not allowing shame to cause you to isolate.
So today, my family looks a little crazy. We are in our late 30s, early 40s, and we're empty nesters. So my husband got started early. I got started early. He has 2 kids, and I have my daughter. And so they are 26, 23, and 21. And so we are empty nesters, and none of our kids are married. And so we're just hanging out, the 2 of us.
That's awesome. So my family today looks like my son is now 7 in the year 2020, which is crazy. And we just hung out with my other son's adoptive family. They know that they're brothers. They definitely have that older brother, little brother thing where Everett just chases Easton around the house, and Easton's like, I'm over this visit, it's not fun anymore. And Everett's like, I don't care, we're gonna hang out and be brothers. And so we just get to hang out often, more than expected, but we do have set visits and set updates every year that we stick to, and we think that that's always necessary to have, because I never wonder when I'm going to see him, regardless of what season either I or his family is in. And so that's really valuable and important. But outside of that, we allow ourselves to live in the freedom of whenever our schedule is free to set, when we're available to hang out, we do so.
That's awesome. So because my daughter was in care in the same home that I lived in, not a whole lot changed. Discipline changed. That role was kind of shifted to my mom, but I was still mom to her, and my mom was still grandma. Just the harder stuff, I guess, was shifted, and I think that was good. I was maybe 60 days clean the first visit that they came to my mom's house, and so I needed that time to look for a job, to get on my feet, get our own apartment, and so it was good that she was there to do that.
In regards to navigating who to call who what, I guess, is that everybody's story is very different, and this is a matter of preference and a matter of loving each other enough to not white knuckle your needs and desires, and to sacrifice and to give in any relationship. Thankfully, I will say this was the one thing out of lots of things that was easy for us and that we landed on the same page at from the beginning. But we decided that from the beginning, I never desired to be or felt the need to be called mom, only because I wasn't parenting him, and I was parenting my 7-year-old, or at the time 3-year-old, and so I felt that it was okay to release that to Allie as she is parenting him every day, and I think I really took into consideration, as they did as well, so many times where each of us were at in our stories, and I felt like that was really important, and Everett was going to be their first child. And so I think that would have been, it was easy for me to give up in that, and it was, I think, important for her as she's parenting a child and attempting to connect with that child.
I would encourage foster and adoptive families, foster parents the most, to pray for the biological family, to pray for the biological mom, to do what you can to stand in the gap for that family. It's not that she doesn't want to be a parent. It's not that she has a desire to have her kids taken away. She's just in a hard time. I would encourage both foster and adoptive families to, if possible, reach out to the biological family and have a connection of any kind. I know when I heard stories about kids being taken away from my friends, there was no education, there was no connection to the family that had their kids, and that was the hardest part and the scariest part, because there isn't a whole lot of education for bio families, and so pray for that and work towards that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it is a time for you to step in to not only a potential parenting role for the child, but also to be a good role model and lead well in a place where another person may not have been led well before or has seen good leadership. And so it is an opportunity while you're caring for the child in foster care, or you are adopting from an expectant family, that you would just step into that role in confidence in who you are and your role in that situation, reminding yourself that the child isn't a possession, but the child's fully capable of loving multiple family members, regardless of what you name that role. You have an aunt and an uncle and a sister and a brother and a grandmother, and you don't know any better. That's your story, and so it's not weird for you. That's not hard for you to extend love to all of those family members. And I would also say to encourage adoptive families and foster families to, one, have community, like get around other believers who are desiring, who have walked through this before you and who are still in the season of that too. And also encourage you guys to sit at the opposite end of the table, inviting other voices into your space. If you are only being educated by adoptive families, by caseworkers, by people who have not walked in the shoes of bio families, you are going to be really lopsided on that education. It's going to be really hard for you to learn how to navigate that and be empathetic to a situation that you may not have been exposed to before.
I have shared, of course not all, but a lot of my story, her story, with her. And so I just hope that I have set a better example in these later years than was set for me, a better example than I set for her, in her early years. I hope that she continues her walk with the Lord, and that, like you said, is empathetic towards other families, other people going through what we went through, that are struggling in any situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would hope that he would just know that I fully love him equally to any other child that I have or currently have, and that he is extremely loved by so many people. It's wild. And that he would just stay focused on the need and desire to be dependent on the Lord and what his role as our Heavenly Father is, and just be reminded of that. And his trauma exists regardless of how good our open adoption is. And so I think just reminding him that regardless of the roles that we play or the lack thereof, how he's experienced all of us playing those roles, that he would just be dependent on the Lord and know that that role has never changed and that role cannot be taken. And yeah, that the Lord just loves him. My thoughts to the church are, hey, this is our place, and we need to be stepping into these roles and navigating these systems, and we need to lead out in this in the foster care system, domestic adoption, international adoption. We have a voice here, and regardless of how many adoptive families are there, and we have a voice not because our situations make us equipped, but because Scripture does, and we know that, and when we know that well, we can lead out well in these conversations. And so I would say, as we really step into this role, I think we can really help bio families and expectant families desire to go to the church first and not walk into an abortion clinic. And I think that I think expectant families and bio families need to see that the church loves them unconditionally as Christ has loved us, and that their sin is no greater than you being prideful towards your wife when you woke up this morning, or you sitting in isolation last night because you decided not to go to your community group or church event, and that where they're at is not below you, but that Christ died for all of it. And so really just taking the leadership role and not saying that this isn't just a pro-life conversation. This isn't just hey, if we're going to be pro-life, what does it mean to make single parenting attractive? Because that is the case for a lot of people. And what are the laws regarding that? And what are the stigmas that they're going to face? And how are we going to help them navigate life after pregnancy? And so it's not just getting the baby through the womb. I feel like I'm a broken record right now. It's not just getting the baby through the womb, but it is life after that. And regardless of what decision she chooses, her life does exist in that. And so what is life after that for her, regardless of the decision she makes?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's it.